Hi, I'm Angela Fehr. This is part 3 of a 4-part series painting a Bauhinia Hong Kong orchid flower. The links and everything you'll need to paint along with me are in the description below this video. For this video, I was going to just continue with the original painting that we did, but before we go back to our first version, I want to just take a little time, whoops, somehow I got some dirty stuff on my brush, take a little time and explore the flowers in a looser way. Often I will find myself falling away from the looseness I had originally intended when I'm working on a painting. Just it's so easy to tighten up, whether you paint once in a while or paint for a living. This is a battle we all fight, and keeping that looseness and that freshness is just a challenge, and I have to continually remind myself to get back to keeping things flowing, keeping them loose. So I'm wanting to, because this one, the first version we were doing, was feeling like it was tightening up to me, I want to spend a little bit of time right now, instead of going back and working on the details of the other. I want to spend a little time right now just working on exploring those flowers in a looser way. So I've just made a puddle of the same original color, and I'm really just looking at the overall shape of the flowers for this. You notice my brush strokes, they swoop up and out. The flower petals, sometimes they're rounded, but they also have a few little points to them, so I've got that variety of edge and a variety of, and now I'm just dropping in some color to give me some variety of color. And over here where I accidentally put in that yellow, we're going to continue with that, because we can now start adding a little bit of our greens that are going to give us our stems and maybe a little bit of leaf background suggestions. So I think sometimes for me, I need to do the wrong thing in order to remember what the right thing is. And if I'm wanting to paint something loosely, I very often have to stop, restart, and recharge my original plan. So that's what I wanted to show you here, is that I'm not just going back to that painting. I do want to finish that first one, but I want to also revisit that whole idea of keeping things loose, and by having kind of, I would say it's kind of like a reaction. I'm reacting to the stuff to the things I was doing in the other painting by painting it again and painting it more loosely. And I actually see the leaves pointing in an upward direction, so this one's going the wrong way, so we'll just change that. There we go. Give it a stem so it's coming up this way. And I'm not painting right up to the flower. Let's try and see how much. Yeah, see, that green wants to flow into the flower petals a lot. So if I paint right up against the flower, I'm going to have trouble right now. So I wait a little bit and give it a chance to start to dry. And I also use gravity. Holding my paper at a slant gives me a way to fight that push of fresh watercolor into the flowers. And already this has like a brighter, fresher look to me. Reaching for some of the rose madder, I think, and dotting that in a few places. So that's a lot fresher. I'm not going to continue my leaves here, I don't think. Right now I'm going to let it dry. Let's just take a look and see how these compare. This one, remember, we spent a fairly good deal of time just paying attention to the outside contours of the flower, and in this one I really didn't. I just focused on kind of the overall shape and the approximate shape of the petals on the edges, and not really, so in a looser way. And by painting this one helped me to loosen up in how I painted this one. So I might not have been able to achieve this looser style from this in my first attempt. That's where painting something more than once is really helpful. And pausing and painting something, restarting can be really helpful too. That doesn't mean this one is done teaching me things. So we're going to pull it over now and spend a little bit of time looking at it. And I'm not sure how finished we'll go here. We're just going to keep working at adding some detail, and we'll stop when we feel like it's at a good stopping place. Looking for a stem first of all, and I think we have our central little stalk here where all these little branches are coming off to the buds. So I think that our flower would come down here somewhat like that. And when you're painting loosely, you have to pay attention to things like that, because by not painting that exact shape that we see, if we go in and position the stem where the photograph tells us, but the flowers haven't been positioned where the photograph tells us, then we are going to be in trouble, because it's going to not match up. And I think a little bit of red in there would be nice. I'm actually using permanent brown. It's kind of a very reddish brown. Dotting that in. And now we can feel free to put some darker greens in. Those darker greens will stand out really nicely against the background, and we can also use them to frame our flower a little bit. Over here we have some really delicate little stamens, and you remember I talked about having to paint around those and needing to be very careful. I like to paint a little bit larger than not right up against them with this larger brush. Let's see here. And then possibly, we'll take a look here in a second. The green I'm using is Jadeite Genuine, and I just painted over that stamen. That's why you have to be so careful not to paint right. That's why I like to give that little bit of room. But now I'm going to grab a smaller brush, and it's fixable, because what I'm going to do is just pretend I didn't paint over it and paint around it as though it was still there. So I'm kind of painting beside it, but it's going to work. And one thing I've learned is if that line gets broken, it still usually works. Our minds just sometimes don't even see those broken lines. So that's very dark and very strong. It's going to make those flower petals come forward. You can also, because it is so dark, I think I'm going to do a little bit of lifting. Maybe some sun is shining on parts of that leaf. So with a thirsty brush, I can lift out. And watercolor is more than just putting paint on the paper. You can also lift paint off to create those really interesting and textured effects. And here I have to go into my flower petal and paint around it as well, just a little bit closer. And this is a good way of tidying up if you have a brush stroke you're not loving, or an edge of a flower that just doesn't look quite perfect to you. You can neaten it up with some dark color. And I'm going to actually go into my flower, because I see some darks inside the flower shape as well, and I think those will help give my petals some distinction. That one's a bit too dark. With that pure color in this small area, it just does come across as almost black. So I paint it and then I lift it, the clean damp brush. Okay, I'm looking at the shape of my brush, and I don't know if you can see that. I should pull in a little bit closer. But it's not nice and smooth and flat right now. And pay attention to the shape of my brush because it's going to really affect the shape of my brush strokes. So when I have a brush shape like that, I need to go back to my palette. Usually is the best way to do it. Just go right into the paint, and I just kind of roll my brush until I get that nice round point again. And sometimes that's a sign that your brush needs to be replaced, or that your brush just isn't the best quality, because not all of them make that really nice point. But often just all it needs is a little revisit to the palette, a little fresh paint to moisten it, and then roll that shape back into place. Now, when we have a dark shape here, there's going to be some connection to it outside of the flower. So maybe we have another leaf there. And I'm just outlining that for your benefit. Ordinarily, I'd probably go straight to my larger brush and fill it in. When your brush is really moist, it's a lot harder to get that controlled line as well. When you're going into a tight area where you need a very specific shape, my brush is actually a little wetter than it should be. When you have a lot of moisture there, it just makes it that much harder to control. And lifting again just for interest. And I'm actually going to drop in some dark paint as well to give some variation. There might be a shadow where the petals come in front of the leaf. So I can drop in some dark value green and get that look of that shadow. While my stem is still damp, it's nice to get a lot of these foreground leaves positioned because the color will flow into the stem. The trick here is continuing without getting it too detailed, and I really want to hold back and not overdo it. What I think is going to pull this all together is just a little more attention to the stamens, all those lovely swoops that come out from the flower. And then I think we're going to take a break and call it done for now. And I always say for now because I love the power of pausing, taking a look and seeing what needs to happen, what works and what doesn't. And when you look with a fresh eye, you'll get a lot better feel for how things are working than if you've been studying it and staring at it from just a few inches away for a long time. Plus, I just love painting these little curved lines. They're so graceful. Most of the time I try to pull out from the center of the flower. You're going to get a more beautiful shape of your stroke. It's going to start a little wider as you press your brush down onto the paper and then lift as you pull away and get thinner. So it works for a much more natural looking line. And that almost looks too fussy. I don't want this area to be too strong, so if I lift, it'll be a little bit softer. That'll let these shapes stay a little more dominant. Over here where the sun is shining, I really don't know if that's working. I might just want to add some contrast there, and those strong contrasts will make that sun look just a little bit brighter. And I think the other thing I want to do is just neaten up or define these little stems. They're a paler green, but a second layer just along one side will give them a little more contour, and a little more contour will make them feel more rounded. more substantial. I still feel like there should be some darks in there, and this is the problem. The problem, when you're painting in a tighter and more realistic style, that's when the details really matter, because they're what makes your object look real. And so it's very hard to add those details if you haven't paid strong attention to detail from the very beginning, if your foundation isn't good. When you are painting in a looser style, then it's much more about mood and feeling, and that's where you have a lot more freedom to interpret and give expression. For this painting, I might only need to define one or two petals here towards the center to give my flowers shape, and just add a little bit more to the stamens that are happening here. And that's all. It's not very much, and so that's why I love a looser style. It's much freer and as you interpret your scene.